Melissa stood in the kitchen like she was delivering a TED Talk, not detonating our marriage. Her voice was smooth, practiced, almost too calm. She leaned against the marble counter, hands wrapped around her herbal tea, and hit me with what she called an enlightened conversation about our future. I should have known something was off by the way she framed it, like we were discussing a vacation or redesigning the living room. But no, this was about her telling me that she had fallen for someone else, and not just anyone, her boss, Nathan Carter. She said his name like I should already know him, like I should be impressed. The same Nathan who shows up on magazine covers for his latest AI startup and gives interviews about work-life balance while clearly working 20 hours a day. That Nathan. She talked about emotional growth, personal expansion, how people evolve, and so should relationships. I stood there, not even sitting down yet, still in my work clothes, wondering if I was hearing her right. She said monogamy was a social construct. I said vows were too, but we still made those. That didn't seem to faze her. She kept going, telling me that this wasn't about hurting me. She wasn't cheating, she was opening. As if that made it noble. As if repackaging betrayal in therapy speak made it less destructive. She'd clearly been rehearsing this speech, probably with him, probably in bed. The words rolled off her tongue with zero hesitation. When she mentioned she and Nathan had already been emotionally intimate for months, I didn't say anything. I felt like I was watching a delayed broadcast of my own life. She talked about how their connection was rare, vibrational, and undeniable, like she was reading from some self-help blog or relationship podcast. I kept staring at her hand. The same hand with the ring I gave her 6 years ago when we still believed in things like loyalty, the kind of hand that used to squeeze mine under dinner tables or brush my face when I couldn't sleep. I asked her if she'd slept with him. She nodded once. No apology. No breakdown. Just confirmation. She said it softly, as if the calm delivery would make it easier to digest. She told me I could either support her journey, her word, or step aside while she explores it. There was no anger, no fight, no emotion really. Just this clinical offer to either co-sign her affair or quietly exit. I remember looking around the kitchen while she spoke. The stupid basil plant she always forgot to water, the pile of unopened mail by the fridge, the glass of wine she poured herself before dropping this bomb. It was like I had entered someone else's house, someone else's life. I could barely remember the drive home that day. Now I couldn't remember how I had ever thought this woman loved me. And the worst part, she didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She really believed she was offering me something fair, a new, modern dynamic where I could either be complicit or be replaced. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just told Melissa I needed a minute and walked out of the kitchen like I was heading to the garage for a screwdriver in reality. I went to the bedroom, closed the door quietly behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like an hour, staring at the floor, hands resting on my thighs, breathing like I was learning how for the first time. My mind wasn't racing. It was eerily still, like the moment before a building implodes. I didn't want to react. I didn't want to give her anything. No anger, no outburst, no validation that what she had done was even worth an emotional response. I needed clarity, not chaos the next morning. I pretended nothing had changed. I made coffee like usual, even poured her a cup without asking, the way I always had. She smiled and thanked me like we were still normal, like the previous night hadn't happened. That smile felt plastic, stretched over something rotting. I nodded, took a sip, and told her I'd been thinking about what she said. I said I wanted to understand her. I said maybe she was right. That love should be about freedom, about letting each other evolve. Her eyes lit up, and she launched into this bizarre TED Talk mode again, rambling about polyamory and emotional intelligence like she was trying to sell me on a wellness app. She started sending me links to articles, podcasts, even a book club invite on the ethics of open relationships. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Some from Nathan, I was sure, but she didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Every conversation felt like a boardroom meeting where she was pitching a concept she'd already committed to, trying to get investor buy-in after the deal was sealed. If you love me, she kept saying, you'll grow with me. I let her talk. I asked questions that sounded sincere. I told her I was trying to wrap my head around all. And I was, but not in the way she thought. I started noticing the way she framed everything. It wasn't I've hurt you. It was this is uncomfortable but necessary. She never once said sorry. Never paused to consider what this did to me. Her words were polished and hollow, like she'd memorized them from a relationship influencer's Instagram captions. When she talked about the fluidity of love, it was with the same tone she used when describing a new yoga instructor or a juice cleanse, like our marriage was just another phase she was outgrowing. I listened. I watched. I became an observer of my own life, as if I'd stepped outside my body and was documenting every moment for some future reckoning. She talked about our marriage like it was an old piece of IKEA furniture, functional once, now outdated, ready to be replaced by something sleeker, more aligned with her current vibration. And me? I was just the couch, the lamp, the end table, whatever didn't fit the new aesthetic. She didn't ask if I wanted to be a part of this change. She assumed I'd either adapt or disappear. So I nodded. I asked her to share more. I played the part, because I needed to see exactly how far she'd go when she thought I wasn't resisting. And she did. She opened the door wide and showed me just how little I mattered in the new version of her life. Melissa thought she had me right where she wanted. Pliable, evolving, open-minded. I nodded when she spoke, mirrored her tone, asked the kind of questions that made me sound curious rather than broken. She believed I was adapting, that I was internalizing her vision of modern love, but in reality, I was building a quiet exit while playing the part she scripted for me. I wasn't fighting anymore because I needed her to lower her guard. And she did completely. The day I installed the passive sync app on her phone, she was in the shower listening to one of those echo chamber podcasts hosted by a woman who'd left her family for radical authenticity. I sat on the edge of the bed, barely blinking, and connected her cloud to mine. I told myself it wasn't out of jealousy, and it wasn't I didn't want to see sex or naked photos. I wanted her thoughts, the ones she didn't say out loud. I wanted access to the version of her that she saved for Nathan, the version I no longer knew. The data trickled in slowly, calendar entries, note fragments, shared files from collaborative apps she used with him. Her calendar was filled with color-coded events that read like inside jokes. Recalibration walk, nourishment session, Bodhi time. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been my life. There was a folder of shared notes titled Wife 2.0, and that's exactly what Nathan had saved her as in his contacts. It was like watching strangers play house with my wife, using my marriage as set dressing for their little self-actualization fantasy. She wrote him long messages late at night, poetic garbage laced with overused buzzwords. She called him my becoming, like he was some cosmic event that had cracked her open. She thanked him for initiating her awakening, and talked about how she'd never known love could feel like this, limitless, evolving, untethered. I scrolled through them in silence, jaw tight, eyes burning but dry. There were checklists too, goals for their retreat, which, as it turned out, wasn't some healing solo journey, but a romantic trial separation. She was test driving a life without me, all while making me believe I was invited along for the ride. I found a draft of a letter she planned to read to me before leaving, crafted with gentle cruelty, dense with phrases like sacred divergence and authentic release. She even included a few compliments, like she was offering me a parting gift. I read it over and over, memorizing every line until I could recite it like scripture. She was rewriting our ending before I'd even agreed we were close to done. So I kept smiling. I kept nodding. I watched her pack books about tantric freedom and mindful detachment into her overnight bag, and I kissed her on the cheek like a man who didn't already know everything. Because knowing didn't hurt as much as pretending I didn't. And pretending was the only way I could leave with dignity intact. It started with the living room speaker glitching, a strange pop, a sudden cut in music, and then silence. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but something told me to check the recordings. Our home assistant system had a memory feature. Nothing major, just fragments of commands, queries, sometimes background noise. I opened the app out of idle curiosity, expecting to hear maybe a playlist request or a grocery list. What I found instead stopped everything inside me. The first clip was from a night I was working late. Melissa and Jamie were drinking wine, their voices low but not whispering, clearly unaware the device had caught them mid-conversation. Jamie's laugh was the first thing I heard. Sharp, cruel. Not the way she laughed when we were all together. Then Melissa, voice airy and bright, almost giddy, said, "It's not even guilt anymore. It's power." Jamie responded, "That's what I've been telling you. You're not betraying anyone, babe. You're rewriting the rules." At first, I thought maybe it was a cruel joke between friends, a badly phrased metaphor. But the next few recordings made it crystal clear. They weren't talking about some hypothetical scenario. They were talking about me, about Nathan, about keeping me softened, pacified, manageable. There was a conversation where Jamie talked about coaching Melissa through the language of evolution, teaching her how to reframe infidelity as transformation. He won't fight if he thinks he's healing. Jamie said Melissa laughed and called it emotional aikido. Then came the worst part. One night, after what I thought was Melissa's yoga class, she came home glowing, loose, and smiling. The recording from earlier that evening confirmed why. She'd been at Nathan's place. Jamie was there too. In one clip, Melissa bragged about how they'd all spent the weekend together at the retreat house. Her words, "We were like this holy trinity of pleasure and growth." Jamie chimed in, calling it next-level intimacy. It wasn't spiritual. It wasn't even about love. It was a game, a performance. They used words like energy alignment and sacred touch, while mocking the idea of honesty behind closed doors. I kept listening, clip after clip, each one carving out another chunk of whatever trust one had left. They spoke of me like I was an experiment. He's still buying it, Melissa said. I don't think he has it in him to walk. Jamie replied, good. Don't push him too hard. Keep him steady until you don't need the house anymore. That was when I realized this had never been confusion or emotional overflow. It was strategy. Cold, rehearsed manipulation dressed up in spiritual lingo and progressive branding. They were validating each other, layering deceit with affirmations, telling themselves they were empowered while dismantling my life like it was a test run for some self-help seminar. Melissa wasn't lost. She wasn't struggling. She was complicit and coordinated. And I wasn't living in denial anymore. I was living in the center of a lie, so polished it shined. The morning Melissa left for her off-site retreat, she was radiant, almost theatrical in how serenely she moved around the house. She wore soft linen, hair twisted into that deliberately effortless style she favored when she wanted to look soulful, and she hummed to herself as she folded clothes in her duffel bag like she was packing for some sacred rite. I watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, neutral. She didn't notice how still I was. She didn't sense the silence had changed. She smiled when I offered to help zip up her bag. I handed her the essential oil pouch she nearly forgot on the nightstand, the one she always said grounded her. She hugged me, light, impersonal, like the kind of hug you give someone you've already emotionally left, and said, thank you for being so supportive. This is important for me. I nodded, told her I understood, told her I hoped she'd find exactly what she was looking for. She kissed my cheek and walked out the front door without looking back. As soon as the door closed, I exhaled, not with grief or relief, just with precision. I turned and walked back through the house, straight to the closet. Her side first. I pulled out hangers, started folding her things into boxes. No hesitation. The wedding photos came down next. One by one, frame by frame, the grins and soft focus of a life we no longer live staring at me like ghosts with no power. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just moved efficiently, the way someone moves after a long delay on a plan they've already committed to. By that afternoon, every visible trace of her was packed, sealed, and labeled. I contacted a realtor we'd met years ago at a neighbor's party. Nice woman, quiet, discreet. I told her I was preparing to list the house. No timeline yet, just putting things in motion. She didn't ask questions. I like that about her. I didn't need sympathy or a shock, I needed logistics. Then I drafted the message to Amanda Carter. It was short, direct, no emotion, no build-up. Just, hi Amanda. I believe I have something you'll want to see. I attached screenshots, copies of calendar entries, the synced cloud notes, the ones that refer to Melissa as Wife 2.0, the messages calling her my becoming. I didn't add commentary. I didn't dramatize it. I knew the evidence would speak for itself. Amanda responded within an hour. Her reply was even shorter than mine. You're not the first, but maybe the last to stay quiet. That was it. No gasps, no fury, just confirmation. This wasn't new to her. Nathan's pattern had been wearing a new face every few years, each one convinced she was the revelation that made his betrayal profound. Melissa was just another chapter in a book he'd memorized. I closed the message and sat back in the chair. Everything was quiet again, but this time it was mine. She walked through the door like she was returning from a spa weekend, suitcase wheels humming against the tile, her smile warm but smug, the kind of expression someone wears when they think they've pulled off something graceful. Melissa dropped her bag near the entryway and looked up at me, expecting softness, curiosity, maybe even relief. But I didn't say welcome back. I didn't move from where I stood by the staircase. Her smile faltered when her eyes landed on the boxes, neatly stacked, labeled with her name in sharp black marker, a dozen reminders that she didn't live here anymore. What's all this? She asked, her voice tight at the edges, trying to maintain composure. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds longer than comfort allowed. Then I said, "You're visiting." The words landed hard. She blinked, laughed once like she'd misheard me, but when I didn't correct myself, her amusement drained into confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "This is my home." I shook my head slowly. "No, it stopped being your home when you chose to leave it in pieces behind my back." She stepped closer, her breath hitching now. "Can we just talk?" I met her eyes without flinching. "You've been doing nothing but talking. Monologues about expansion, about evolution, about emotional realignment. What you haven't done is be honest. Not once." Her posture changed, shoulders stiff, mouth drawn, The retreat glow now cracked to the surface. I told her everything I knew. I told her about the sink cloud, the notes, the recordings, the thin layer of smug deceit she dressed in spiritual silk. I told her I knew about Jamie too. How her best friend wasn't just her confidant, but her co-conspirator, sleeping with Nathan and whispering in her ear about how betrayal could be framed as liberation. Her hand shot to her mouth, a reflex she couldn't control. She looked like she wanted to disappear. I thought you'd need time, she finally whispered. Time to understand. I almost laughed. Understand what? That I was collateral in your journey towards self-love? That you needed a clean conscience while dirtying everything we built? She sat on the edge of the couch, her couch, the one I was planning to sell, and held her head in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she looked lost. I didn't think you'd actually, her voice broke. That I'd what? Have boundaries? That I'd wait here like a placeholder while you rebranded yourself? She didn't speak. She didn't move. Her shoulders trembled, the tears finally coming. But there was no comfort left to give. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply told her the truth. She didn't leave me for growth. She walked away from decency and came back to a house she no longer recognized because she never thought I'd find the strength to remove her from it. But I had. And I already had. I sat on the edge of their overstuffed floral-patterned sofa, the same one Melissa used to complain about whenever we visited. Her parents had asked me to come for a conversation. Their word, not mine. I already knew what it would be. The well-meaning intervention, the collective denial, the desperate rewriting of the past to make her actions less brutal. They served tea like we were discussing home renovations. Her mother clasped her hands as if prayer alone could soften reality. Her father leaned forward, trying to exude calm authority. And her sister, always the voice of passive judgment, perched at the end of the armchair like a therapist playing pretend. We think there's been a misunderstanding, her mother began, gentle, her voice thick with performative concern. Melissa's going through something complicated. But you two have history. Marriage is about weathering storms. Her father nodded, his expression grave. She made a mistake, yes. But a marriage doesn't end over a mistake. You have to look at the whole person, the years you spent together. Don't throw it away just because it got hard. Then her sister chimed in, folding her arms. Honestly, Eric, maybe if you'd been more open to growth, she wouldn't have felt so trapped. You always saw the world in black and white. Marriage isn't that simple. I said nothing at first. I let them speak. I let their ignorance wrap itself in compassion. Let their blind loyalty pile into the center of the room like an unspoken dare. Then, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. Not dramatic, not angry, just methodical. I opened it on a coffee table, spreading out the printouts, photos, synced calendar screenshots, transcripts of synced texts. I didn't say a word until their eyes began scanning the pages. Then I read aloud. He's either too weak to stop me or too loyal to walk. I paused. That's what she wrote to Jamie, the friend who was also sleeping with her boss. I shifted my eyes from her mother to her father. She didn't stumble into another man's bed. She packed lingerie. She booked lodging. She created a private itinerary and labeled it self-care. The room shifted then, like the air had thickened. Her mother's hand moved instinctively to her chest. Her father's jaw clenched, though he said nothing. Her sister stared at the table, mouth slightly open, blinking rapidly. She didn't make a mistake. I continued, voice steady. She engineered a betrayal. She disguised it with spiritual jargon and progressive language. But at the core of it, she lied, manipulated, and recruited others to validate her choices. She didn't fall, she planned. No one spoke. The tea had gone cold on the table. The room that had felt like an ambush now felt like a courtroom after a verdict. I stood, gathered the papers, and tucked them back into the folder. This wasn't about a misunderstanding, I said quietly. This was about clarity, and now you have it. Then I left. Not because I was angry, because I was done. As I stood up and slid the folder back into my bag, her sister's voice broke the silence, soft but sharp enough to carry. Did you ever love her? It wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't innocent either. It was the kind of question that aims to wound you on the way out, to pin guilt on your back like a souvenir for daring to walk away. I looked at her for a moment, really looked, and then nodded once. I did, I said, more than she ever understood. But she gave me a choice. Either share her or stand by while she slept with someone else, and called it transformation. I let that sink in for a second, then allowed myself the smallest smile. So I picked option 3. I told her to start packing. There was no dramatic exit, no slamming of doors. I adjusted my coat, took one last glance around the living room, at the walls that held portraits of a daughter they thought they knew, at the family who had chosen to defend betrayal disguised as reinvention. And I walked out, but it wasn't just the house I was leaving. I was stepping out of the entire storyline Melissa had written for me. The docile man, the quiet, passive partner, the background character in her self-styled awakening. I had played that role longer than I should have, letting her turn deception into philosophy and betrayal into branding. She needed me to stay silent so her narrative could thrive, but I wasn't interested in being part of that fiction anymore. Outside, the wind was sharp but clean. I pulled the door closed behind me and took the steps slowly, not out of reluctance, but with certainty. Every footstep felt like punctuation at the end of a chapter. The version of me she counted on, the one too patient, too loyal, too paralyzed by hope, that man didn't make it out of the house with me. He stayed behind, buried under the wreckage of her reinvention. When I got home, it was quiet. No ambient playlist drifting from speaker, no scented candles trying to mask tension. Just space. Bare walls where her framed affirmations used to hang. Empty drawers. Silence that wasn't awkward anymore. It felt still, but finally honest. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, it felt like I could breathe in my own story without waiting for her to explain what it meant.